As a poli-sci major, government has always interested me, from the vast complexities of it to the legacy that the Founding Fathers have left behind. Part of that legacy is making sure that from generation to generation, the foundation that they laid in the Constitution for the government has always been able to be prolonged due to the checks and balance systems and the ways in which people are elected to their offices or chosen and confirmed into their offices. It's a vast network that somehow works, even though theoretically sometimes it shouldn't. The three branches of government that we're going to talk about today are the judicial branch, the executive branch, and the legislative branch. So first, let's start with the judicial branch. Most people think of it as the Supreme Court, but it also entails the lower federal courts. And the way people are appointed to this is by the executive branch. So that's one of the checks and balances. And the federal courts, the way it works, the lower federal courts make their decisions, and then if the plaintiffs aren't happy with the decisions, they're able to appeal. And they appeal up to the Supreme Courts. And the Supreme Court decides if to take a case or if not to take a case. And if you're lucky enough to have your case chosen to be reviewed by the Supreme Court, it will then go to the Supreme Court and they'll make a decision to see if the ruling was constitutional or unconstitutional or an infliction upon your rights. And the way these members of the Supreme Court and the federal courts are chosen is by the executive branch, and then it goes to the Senate for a confirmation hearing. They vet each person to make sure that they have a clean record and that this is an area in which politics is able to play a role. So if it fits the specific Senate's agenda for that term or for the long run, because many a times Supreme Court decisions can make a lasting impression. And next, we have the executive branch. And the executive branch, most people believe, have a lot of power, but in reality, they really don't. And according to the politics of the presidency of the United States, most presidents can only make modest adjustments to the federal budget and to the federal government size. And the way, of course, we all know that they are elected by the people, but the people also elect our electoral college, and that's really the people who behind the scenes pick the president, according to what their state's will is through the election. The executive branch has checks and balances just like everybody else. They are able to veto legislation that comes to their desk to be signed into law, so they have the choice to sign it into law or to veto it. If they were to veto it, then it gets sent back to the legislation, and they can decide if they can get a 2/3 vote to null and void that veto. And the executive branch has the power to ask the Supreme Court to hear certain cases to see if certain laws are constitutional or not. Next, we have the legislative branch. This is probably the most comprehensive and most important to our daily lives, seeing that our legislation is elected by us. We have two parts, the House of Representatives and the Senate. These two parts are more commonly known as Congress. And the House of Representatives is on a 2-year cycle, so every 2 years they're re-elected. And the Senate is on a 6-year cycle, so every 6 years they're re-elected. Senate is meant to be more older generation, whereas the House of Representatives is meant to be more of a younger generation. And the way a bill goes through, it has to pass both House of Representatives and the Senate. And once it does that, it goes to the executive branch. And that's another part of their checks and balances. And as we had mentioned before, in the judicial branch, they have to get approved by the Senate. So that's, again, checks and balances. Now, according to USA.gov, the legislation confirms presidential appointments, and they have the authority to declare war and to make laws. So, in wrap-up, the judicial branch, they decide to interpret laws to see if they are constitutional or not, and the executive branch, they are able to make sure that the laws are enforced, and the judicial branch, the legislative branch, according to American Government by McGruer's, they all are confirmed and take oath of office on January 3rd. And that's also subsequently whenever the president takes his oath of office or her oath of office. And they all start running after that into their judicial, legislative, and executive responsibilities. All of these branches of government are intertwined, and that's what helps them work. It keeps corruption low, and it keeps the American government working. From like in the New York Times, whenever they put that the courts have the final decisions on hearing constitutional amendments and the revision of the court's decisions from the past to the legislation passing laws to the executive enforcing them and being the leadership of the government. All of these work, and they embody the Founding Fathers' original goals for our country and making it be sustainable for many generations past our time and many generations from before our time. And that's what makes government so unique, especially the United States government. And that's why I fell in love with politics.